Hi, my name is Steve. I'm a trainer here at Edgewords, and today I'm going to show you a couple of options available to you for reporting on your Octane project inside of, and indeed outside of, Microfocus's Octane product. Now, if you've been using Octane already, no doubt you'll have done some of your reporting already inside of the dashboard module. This provides a quick at-a-glance view of the health and status of our project. I'm using the demo data here loaded into a brand new fresh instance of Octane, so we do have some interesting data here to look at. So these graphs here are referred to as widgets, and we can add extra widgets of our own if we wish to. There are some built-in widgets categorized by type, but we can also add our own custom graph as well and build things up from scratch. The graphs themselves are live. You can often dig into them. You can click on a section and drill down to the underlying data underneath. And we can get a few different views of this as well. We can look at this in the smart view or the plain old grid view. And we can do some further grouping in here as well, should we wish to. What you may not be aware of is anywhere we have one of these grid views, we can actually export this underlying data off to Excel. So looking at this underlying data, if I hit this button at the top here, we can export that to Excel, and in just a few seconds there it is, ready for us to do any further processing should we need to. And as I say, this applies to anywhere where you see a grid view inside of Octane. So if I jump back to my issues module, have a look at some of my data that's here, we might choose to group this, I guess, by, let's say, severity. There we go. And we can see how we have just one defect in here that doesn't have a severity associated with it. And when we look at the critical severities, we have, let's see, 27 items in there. We can further filter this down if we wish to by perhaps the release. So let's have a look at what's available for AOS 1. And now looking at critical, we're down to just 15 items instead. And as I said just a moment ago, if we want to get at the underlying data, do any further processing, we can hit the Export to Excel button. Open that up and continue with our processing there. When we do this in this way, notice the IDs are hyperlinked here, so we can give those a click and it'll take us back to any particular defect. There is one major downside to this approach, however, and that's that essentially the data we have here is a snapshot in time. We're not able to just refresh this data and get the latest information, and that's what I really want to focus on today. Octane supports something called OData, Open Data Protocol. And it supports both version 2 and version 4 formats. The Open Data Protocol is, as noted on this Wikipedia page here, an open standard. So there's actually quite an ecosystem of tools available to consume Octane's OData feed and produce reports for us. Excel is able to do this, but something like Microsoft's business intelligence tool is able to as well, and there's a whole bunch more. The Open Data Protocol itself is based on REST, so it's a RESTful API. This means it's quite simple for you to write your own, potentially. Jumping over to the OData ecosystem page here and having a look at the consumers section, here we'll find a list of potential tools that we can use to consume our Octane OData and generate some nice reports for us. So to do this, to create an OData feed inside of Octane, there are a couple of things that we need to set up first. What I'm going to do is jump into the site section, the spaces section. And at my shared space level, I need to ensure that a certain parameter is set. So jumping over to parameters here, if I search for basic authentication, we'll see that supports basic authentication is currently set to false. I'm going to need to change that to true. Something else that we should check is our user, and indeed any users that we want to have access to our OData feed have the appropriate permission set. So on the permissions tab, I'm going to go down to, where is it, administration, I believe. No, it's general system actions, sorry. And I notice that Access OData is set for team members. And in fact, as I jump through these are the standard out-of-the-box roles that are available. You'll see that each actually has Access OData set by default. Even the viewer, the lowest permission group, has OData set. So this should be set by default for you. However, if your installation had custom roles applied, it's possible that somebody has toggled that off, and that will prevent your user accessing the OData feed. Basic authentication is where we supply our Octane username and password into our OData consuming tool to provide authentication. For single sign-on instances of Octane, however, we may need to generate an API key. And we can do that from the API access section here. For my installation, using standard usernames and passwords, basic authentication will be absolutely fine. So the next thing to do is launch Excel. Create a basic blank worksheet, and I'm going to switch to the Data tab in the ribbon. Now, there are two sections here, Get External Data and Get and Transform. Just to talk for a moment about the differences between these two. Older versions of Excel, I'm talking 2013 and below, would only have the Get External Data section available. There was a Power Query tool, which is freely available and downloadable from Microsoft and installable into versions of Excel 2013 and lower. That will get you the Get and Transform section, Power Query tools. From Office 2016 onwards, this is built into Excel by default. If using the older tool, then you'll have to use OData version 2. Get and Transform, Power Query tools, we're able to make use of the newer version 4 format. So hitting New Query, I'm going to go down to From Other Sources, and we find From OData Feed. In here, I can supply the URL of my Octane installation, or have a custom URL, which will build up slowly. First thing to do is get the address or the IP address and the port of my Octane installation. Paste that in. And the next thing to do is access the OData feed, which I've bookmarked here. I've got the address of the Microfocus Octane helps server, and we want this section. So I'll copy that, paste it in. This is how the URL is constructed then. We have HTTP, could be s://, the IP address of my Octane server, port, /odata, then /v4, because it's the v4 protocol that I'm going to access. This could be v2 otherwise. Next, we'll need to supply the ID of our shared space by here. And I can get that again by navigating back into Firefox here and having a look at the address at the top. So the bit after the P query, this would be the shared space ID, and then we'd need the workspace as well. In fact, probably the easiest way to get hold of this is to exit settings. There we come. Have a look at the address again. There's our P query. The first part, 1001, that's our shared space ID. 1003, that's our workspace ID. We hit OK to connect. And in a moment, I'll be told that it can't connect because we haven't supplied authentication credentials. Using basic authentication, switch down to the basic section and supply your Octane user's username and password. Try that again. Excellent. We're now presented a list of tables that we can connect to inside of the Octane installation. I'm going to go and have a look at the defects table. We get a short preview of some of the data that's held inside of this defects table. I'm going to hit Transform Data, which will take me into the Power Query interface. Right, so here is our defects table. And looking at it, some of the columns we may not require. So let's have a look. Perhaps has comments here. I can see there's nothing that isn't false, so let's remove that column. And as we perform steps inside of the Power Query interface, the applied steps are listed in the right-hand column, so we can go back at any time and readjust them using the gear option, or we can remove a step as well. Now, as I come along, having a look at my defect data, I think to myself, what column headings do I need in here? We probably want to report on severity, maybe the phase, maybe the release a defect is assigned to, and perhaps a team a defect is assigned to as well. As I have a look over, I see a release column, but I note that the release is not listed underneath. It just says record. If I give that a little click, this gives me details of a sort of subtable, if you like. And I notice, a little scroll down, the release name is given under the name field. So let's hit the little configuration button on the top. This will take me into that record, and I could return all of the fields of that record if I wish to, but really I'm only interested in the name field. Let's do that. Okay, and now our defect, each of our individual defects, is associated as well with its release name. Keep going. Phase as well. Let's get the phase name, so we can tell which defects are opened, closed, etc. Have a look at severity record. Once again, it looks like the severity is held in a name field. And let's take a look at the team as well. Yeah, looks like the teams are under a name field also. Okay, let's apply that. Close and load it. And after a few moments, we get something that's really rather similar to what we got just by exporting the data out of Excel using the toolbar icon. However, there's one major difference here. This data can be refreshed. So any changes that take place on the Octane server can be loaded in. Let's see if that works. So noticing here, I've got a defect ID of 1086 at the top, and we've got the name here, activation email sent to Yahoo email address marked as spam. Let's change the name of this particular defect inside of Octane. Let's reset one or two things. 1086, I think it was. Yes. So let's alter the name. Okay, that's been applied. Coming back to Excel, well, it's not updated straight away, but we can choose to refresh. Oh, and though I've refreshed there, it looks like 1086 has moved. Let's go and find it. And there it is, the name has been updated. We can change some refresh options here as well. Underneath the refresh button, we have connection properties. And in here, we can see that we can choose to refresh the data potentially every 60 minutes or less. We can adjust that. And perhaps refresh the data when opening this file. So indeed, we can save this Excel file every time it's reopened, the latest data is pulled in. So at this stage, we've got our Octane data into Excel, and this gives us all the advantages of Excel. It gives us all the statistical tools, all the formulas, functions, everything that an Excel wizard might want to do to massage this data and produce interesting, useful reports, graphs, and documentation. One of the things that's very common is to create something like a pivot table. So let's have a go at that. Underneath the Insert option in the ribbon, we've got pivot table here. In fact, we've got recommended pivot tables. Excel will generate a couple of interesting pivot tables for us automatically. Let's have a look at what we've got. Maybe the sum of remaining hours, so we can see for our critical defects how many hours are left remaining, how many hours we've got left planned. Other than that, however, we could generate our pivot table from scratch if we wanted to. So let's hit pivot table at the top, select a table or range. Defects table will work fine. We'll OK this, and Excel's pivot table interface pops up. So if I wanted to create a table where that showed only defects that were new or open, and perhaps grouped by severity, we could do it in this way. Let's perhaps grab the ID, and we'll put this in the rows section. We'll grab the severity, put that in the column, and we'll grab the phase to filter by. In the values section, let's just grab the ID, or rather the count, so we can count up for each one. And using this then, we could say we're not really interested in defects that have been closed, we're not really interested in defects that have been fixed, so we'll just see which ones are still new and opened. If I do this perhaps instead of on an ID basis, we could do this using the name of the defect instead. There we go. So that's quite nice. Let's try a slightly different pivot table. So coming back, we'll add a new pivot table. Again, I'll have it blank. And let's see, what could we do? We could perhaps put the severity in columns, and perhaps the phase inside of rows. And then we can count up what we've got for each. So we can now see that we have 7 closed critical defects. We have 21 medium new defects available to us right now. Once again, if I go and grab the release name, put that into my filters, we can filter this down now to only show us data from a particular release. We might go as far as adding the team as well. And we can filter down into an individual team. And this, of course, is all dynamic. If the data changes, all we need to do is refresh the underlying worksheet. So I can come back to my worksheet over here, switch into the data section, and hit refresh, and pull in the latest data, and those pivot tables will be updated automatically for me. Going a stage further, we have the ability to use conditional formatting inside of Excel as well. So if we grab this and go to home, we can choose conditional formatting, perhaps choose some color scales. There we go. So lower numbers get colored in green, higher numbers get colored in orange, and so on. As well as this, we're able to add charts also. So let's add a pivot chart. Excuse me. Let's just jump in there, add a pivot chart. We'll have a pie chart. And there we go. So OData gives us a way to get our data out of Octane and into a tool such as Excel to do further processing. The link remains live, so we can refresh that data and pull the latest information from Octane at any stage. As an example of another tool that can consume an Octane OData feed, let's take a quick look at Microsoft's Power BI application. Using Power BI, we can analyze our Octane data and, for example, create dashboards for our personal use, or at paid tiers publish them for others in our organization, generating reports such as these. So I've gone ahead to the download page and I've downloaded and installed Microsoft Power BI Desktop. So let's get that launched now. Next up, let's connect to our Octane OData feed. Using the same URL before, that is http:// my IP address, my Octane port, OData, v4 for the version 4 OData format, shared space 1001 being the shared space ID, workspaces 1003. Just as in Excel, we're prompted for our user's basic authentication details. And at this stage, we get a very similar dialog to Excel's Power Query tool. We're prompted to select the tables that we want to import. Now I'm going to bring in the user stories table this time. Let's go to Choose Column because we don't need all of these columns. And select just the ID, name, release, and test columns. As before, sometimes these come in as individual records. So if we want to pull some of the fields from an individual record, we go into the configuration button at the top. I'd like to get the release name. And additionally, perhaps filter for one of these releases. Looking at the test column, let's get the name and ID. Okay, looks good. Let's go. Power BI offers a number of visualizations for our test data. I'm going to start with matrix, which is a table. And into this table, let's pop in, let's see, the ID, all rows, and perhaps the test name for columns. And for values, we'll pop in the test ID, but we'll make sure we count it. So we now have a table that tells us which tests are in use for which ID. In fact, if we come back to that table again, just very quickly, let's put in the name underneath each, and then we can expand them out and see which user stories are associated with which test. Additionally, we might choose to show this data in the form of a pie chart. Again, Power BI Desktop is just one tool of many that can consume an OData feed and generate reports for us. The key takeaway from today is that you are not limited just to the tools that Octane itself provides. Through the use of OData feeds, we can export our data, we can refresh that data, and have tools consume that data and generate live updates for us. Thanks for listening.